He's made some mistakes, John.
He has. That ad may be among them. Now, let's get what is a pretty rare insight into the highest levels of Barack Obama's two successful presidential campaigns, and also the struggle that he's had turning those electoral successes into significant legislative achievements. Joe Rospars was Barack Obama's chief digital strategist after getting a start with Howard Dean's pioneering but ultimately ill-fated presidential campaign a decade ago. The lessons learned in that Dean campaign, using the internet and email to engage voters and raise funds, created the playbook that Obama then mastered. Joe Rospars is in Australia for the Sydney Writers' Festival, and we caught up with him this week. Joe Rospars, welcome to Planet America.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go back 10 years almost exactly now to when the Howard Dean campaign was just taking off. You were there at the time. What was driving that? Because when he was on the show recently, he credited you guys. He said it was the digital strategy that really started it all.
Well, as somebody who was there working on the digital strategy, I credit Howard Dean. He was a person who was speaking out and sort of speaking through the filter at a moment when there was a culture of fear in American politics around who's criticizing the Bush administration, and a lot of the Democrats were driven more by calculation and fear of their own, political safety than by what they actually supported themselves or what they thought was the true thing to be saying. And so Dean was a guy who ran like he had nothing to lose, and that was what got me hooked and involved in moving to Burlington, Vermont, without the promise of a job or anything, to go do it. And that's what I know drew a lot of other folks to him.
Is that campaign always going to be the first great love of you guys that went from the Dean campaign in 2003, then into the first Obama campaign in 07, 08?
There's a couple of us who went from Dean into the Obama campaign in 07, 08. But I think Dean's, the importance of that campaign was bigger than that. It was the first digital moment in politics that was sort of on purpose and by design, and that's in contrast to there was a sort of moment with McCain in 2000 where he won unexpectedly in New Hampshire, and people gave online. So it was the first time there was sort of online giving in a moment, but they were sort of a passive participant in that. And I was actually one of those people who gave to McCain when he beat Bush in New Hampshire. I thought that was a cool thing, and he had been talking about campaign finance reform, and so I was like a McCain, Bill Bradley kind of guy back then. But with Dean, it was there was a strategy that was conscious about getting grassroots people involved, making sure that you're trying to use the website and the internet to provide tools for them to connect with each other, and figuring out how to make that work. The downfall of the Dean campaign obviously was that it didn't work. We were great at building those relationships and getting people sort of energized, but not great at translating that into meaningful outcomes.
Okay, so skipping forward 10 years, there's no doubt that you've converted support into votes through Barack Obama. But the next step, which a lot of people say at the moment, is where these people go when the election's over. Say, take gun control as an issue, for example. Where do they all go? Where do they all disappear? Why can't these people be mobilised from day-to-day governing?
Yeah, well, there's this weird thing about American presidential politics is that these campaigns start from scratch and then go out of business. And so unlike a parliamentary system like here in Australia or in the UK, where the sort of party has this sort of baseline of staff and activity all the time, and then there's a bit of a bump when the election happens, for us, it's not run out of the party, and it's not run out of the White House. It's this from-scratch startup organization with a big empty office, in our case in Chicago, where you have a new budget and new staff, you bring new people in. In my case, on the digital team, we had about 300 people, many of whom never worked in politics before. They weren't, from our party infrastructure or from the White House. And so when the campaign's over, all that's gone. And so right now, the organization, OFA, Organizing for Action, which is the successor to the campaign, is still very small. It's a new set of people who have to get a new office in Chicago and start up this thing. The asset of the list and the social media presence and all that persists, but the organizational ability to mobilize on it is a complete changeover from the campaign.
But you had a previous generation of OFA, Organising for America, that stayed in place after 08, and despite all the hopes that this was going to change government and keep people engaged, certainly judged on the results in the 2010 midterms, it didn't deliver.
Yeah, and the approach that the president decided to take with Organizing for Action, the post-2012 entity, is quite literally the opposite of the approach that we took in 2009 with Organizing for America. And so in 2009, the campaign entity went into the party and became a project of the DNC based on Capitol Hill, part of that whole inside D.C. culture and was run by the party staff and was constrained by those realities, and specifically around the election. I mean, that it was an election entity sort of trying to help with the governing bid and trying to keep people engaged, and it was a very fraught thing. And so after the 2010 election, the president talked about that they had spent a lot of time trying to get things done in Washington and playing this inside game, but not a lot or not enough time trying to change the way that things get done by involving the outside group and people who really want to help, but who are outside the D.C. process involved. And so now OFA, Organizing for Action, in 2013 is based in Chicago, and it's a 501c4 nonprofit. It's specifically prohibited from participating in election politics and campaigns. It's an issue organizing group to try to help impact the legislative process in Washington, but also in all the states. The chapters are popping up and fighting in city council matters and statewide referenda and things like that.
So do you think progress is being made in that regard then?
I think structurally it's set up to succeed a lot more. Whether the organization is able to step up and staff up and do those things, obviously remains to be seen, but I'm working on it with them, and I'm optimistic.
Is it even naive to think that in an electoral system where the people have a say every 4 years or every 2 years, that sort of trying to bring public pressure to bear, as President Obama has done a number of times, going kind of around the Congress to the people, it doesn't actually work? There's no mechanism to make that work, and unless you've got to pay off in 12 months or 18 months in the midterms. Yeah,
well, we have a problem in the United States that pressuring Congress is very difficult, because more than 90% of them are in gerrymandered safe seats and know that they won't ever have to face voters in a way that is meaningful. And so their political calculations are around the people who are funding their campaigns to make them stay safe and avoiding primary challenges from crackpot people in the more extreme direction from them. And so that really distorts the field of influence that an ordinary person can have on the Congress. That being said, campaigns are obviously, when people focus on these issues and when people get involved, there's a big hockey stick of activity around an election time, and you have to try. You have to try to keep people involved. It's never going to be the same as the last 6 weeks of a presidential election, but the point is, and I think this is important for the president, not just for getting things done, but for how he thinks about people's role in the political process, is that you have to try. You have to have an organization that says Washington's going to be open for business to supporters of issues that want to get involved and do something. And so I'm happy about, and I think it's the smart thing to do, but it's also the right thing to do, to have this organization, OFA, be out there to try to mobilize these people and be open to their participation in getting things done.
So is the hope to create the same kind of force from the left that exists on the right, of creating the incipient fear of primary challenge, especially for senators, if they don't go along with the course of OFA?
I'm not sure that OFA is going to be in that sense. I mean, that's more of an electoral politics thing, and I think OFA is a little bit more about mobilizing on the issues that are important to the people who are members of the chapters and that are important to the president as well. The right has a very different sort of economics of influence than the left, and that's what you're getting at there. I'm not sure that OFA is going to be the thing to make that happen on our side, but I think our side could benefit from a little bit more of that.
Do you have a sense now, Joe, those that were in there in the very early days of the Obama movement, how they're feeling, seeing the scandals now hitting early in the second term and so on? Is there a disillusionment, or does the dream live on?
Can I rewind and insert some scare quotes around your use of the word scandals? No, I think that the folks that I talk to and who support the president out in the states and who aren't part of the the DC thing, whether that's in Congress or in sort of the media bubble of DC, want him to not be distracted, because I think the president's opponents know that Congress and the sort of mainstream narrative media in DC can really only focus on one or two things at once, and so as many sort of noisy things that they can gin up or throw in there or disingenuously be outraged about or disingenuously say something the president has something to do with, they know that they're just burning down the days, right? And there's a finite number. We know the number of days that the president is going to be president, and they feel like if they can have the Congress and the press focus on these other things rather than what the president was elected to do, that's a win for them. It's terrible, cynical politics. I actually can't stand it, and it's one of the reasons I don't particularly like politics very much. But I think that the president and a whole bunch of his supporters are determined to try to get things done despite it.
So, bottom line, do you personally feel that the change that was promised is possible, is happening?
Yeah, I think there's great things that happened in the first term around the Obamacare law, around student loan reform, around the stimulus and the Recovery Act and all these things. There's a ton of great stuff that happens and that frankly isn't talked about enough. I think there's hope for immigration reform. I think there's some hope something's going to get done on gun safety. There's hope for some climate change work in this term. I think if there's something that I've learned through the course of the Obama era is that the cynicism and obstruction of the other side, like they're playing a long game, and the willingness to just run out the clock and say and do anything to stop the other side's agenda, to stop the president, has been at a depth that I did not fully appreciate when I was involved in even from being involved in politics before.
Joe Rospars, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.